Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. The Ukraine War news update for the 4th of December 2023. Let's get straight to where I normally start, which is the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can see them in the description to this video found below. Okay, so we have 770 personnel lost. It is going down slightly from where it has been, above 1,000. We're now into the 700s. 5 tanks, 5 APVs, and 12 artillery systems. That, again, I have to say, will be dictated somewhat by the weather conditions. It's difficult with this time of year producing a lot of rain and snow. We've had heavy storms and winds. It's been pretty horrible, but whether that is still affecting these figures to a large degree is kind of unknown. It might well be that there are just not as many flashpoints along the front line, although we do hear that Avdiivka is still very active. The areas up and down that northeastern axis are active, slightly quiet on the southern front line, and I believe Dnipro is probably pretty active too. 19 vehicles and fuel tanks, 1 piece of special equipment. Obviously, weather will affect the usage of drones. Drones are used for blowing things up with regard to first-person view drones, but also blowing things up with regard to spotting for artillery and for mortar crews, so on and so forth. So if you can't use drones, you ain't going to be destroying a lot of stuff. So it could be that drones have been constrained in their use. Right, here we see Andrew Perpetua's list, the mapper that I refer to a lot. He compiles a list on a daily basis. This is what he saw from yesterday. And you can see another ratio of somewhere around 4-1 Russian to Ukrainian losses. So it's definitely in favor of the Ukrainians again. Let's have a look at the sort of value of the kit. The Ukrainians, they've got a Bradley in there. They've got a piece of artillery, an FH-70. And the rest is kind of, they're, you know, pretty normal stuff. Humvee, BTR. Look at the causes. All drones apart from an ATGM for some unknown piece of kit. Andrew's put an unknown thing has been destroyed. It is Ukrainian, but I don't know what it is. Obviously something that is so fundamentally destroyed that you don't know. Then when you look at the Russian stuff here, there's a lot of unknown causes. I would assume these are bits of kit that have been found, I don't know, possibly around Avdiivka, where you've got maybe a column of equipment that is destroyed, and you, as you walk past that or drive past that from the footage point of view, you don't know what's blowing it up, whether it is an ATGM, a mine, or a piece of artillery. So here we have a lot of, or a number of tanks, T-80 tanks, T-72s. We've got a number of infantry fighting vehicles of various types, and then a couple of bits of artillery. So nothing of incredibly high value, but just a lot more stuff than the Ukrainians, and so therefore that is to the benefit of the Ukrainians. Right. Then as we go on here, there is a list that I can't read, unfortunately. I could put it through Google Lens and see what the translation is for some of these categories, but I don't know if it'll pick it. It should be able to, might be able to pick it up. The quality is not great. But this is Magyar's list. So he's a guy in charge of a unit, or I don't know, possibly several units of drone operators. So Robert Magyar gratifies us with an amazing video summarizing his work in November. So the video shows, it's a montage of lots of stuff that he has been responsible for destroying, or his guys. And then it's put on this chart here. Now, again, I'm not sure whether November is just in the white and the orange is a total. Who knows? But possibly, you know, 25 vehicles, SUVs, carrying machine guns and whatnot, 5 trucks, 5 APVs, 3 APCs, 3 IFVs, and 1 tank. That, or whether it's 8, 6, and 15, I don't know. So this is an appeal because it looks like quite a useful bit of information, and appealed to you guys to see if you know the translation for that chart. Now here's a little analysis of the deaths around Bakhmut. So in November, the occupiers lost 8,700 people in the Bakhmut direction. Terrorists continue their meat assault, said the head of the public relations service, Vladimir Fityo. quote, the losses of the enemy on our line of responsibility since the beginning of November are 8,700 people. This is only on our front line. In the Russian Federation, a covert mobilization is being carried out to replenish these losses. And accordingly, in addition to the losses of the 200th and 300th, they have a problem with non-respondents and deserters who leave the battlefield. In other words, dead and injured, those are cargo 200, cargo 300. They also have a problem with non-respondents and deserters who leave the battlefield. So I guess you're going to have POWs, deserters, all sorts of other issues there. But those are high numbers for just the Bakhmut direction. And then this reminded me that, I'm so sorry, Dell. So Dell does an open source Excel spreadsheet that is available below. It's on every single one of my videos, a link to it, and it compiles the general staff figures and presents them in graphs so you can see trend lines. I've done analyses of that data before in videos, and I'm due to do another one, but he sent me an analysis of the Avdiivka losses, looking at the losses up to the Avdiivka counteroffensive and then the general staff figures during that kind of month. So during actually 53 days, so 5th of October to the 27th of November, when Russia went on the attack and then lost all that equipment and troops. And just going to quickly dip into this. So when in his data analysis, he's got only Avdiivka and without Avdiivka. That is, only Avdiivka is the Avdiivka time frame. It's not just the geographical area of Avdiivka, but during that time frame, you have an increase. So the average or losses per day in terms of personnel will equate to 476 per day. That's the average over the whole war up until the 5th of October. And then after the 5th of October till sort of a week ago, it moved to 847 per day, 148 really. So that is equivalent to an increase of 372 people on average per day. In other words, Avdiivka appears to have represented an increase personnel loss of 372 people per day, every day for 53 days. Now, that may not just be in Avdiivka, but I think it is pretty indicative. This is a nice analysis. Thank you, Dell. So he's also shown that the Avdiivka was responsible for an increase of 6.5 tanks per day, 8.3 APVs lost extra per day, and 12.6, almost 13 pieces of artillery lost per day. Avdiivka, in other words, was incredibly expensive for the Russians. At what cost? Well, that's the cost. But what did they gain? Well, Avdiivka Northern Advance, 5.8 square miles. The Southern Advance, 2.15 square miles. And the total's almost 8 square miles, or 20, just over 20 square kilometers. Now, that would have increased in the last week because Ukraine had been under the Kosh, both to the north and to the south. So that would have changed, but also the losses would have changed. Suffice to say that Avdiivka will go down in history, I'm sure, as an incredibly expensive, fairly disastrous campaign for the Russians. Although, if your metric isn't concerned with the loss of equipment and personnel, then this might go down as a success for the Russians. Over history, we have learned that the Russians don't value their own human lives, their troops' lives and their equipment losses at all. Because it's all about other gains. So gains in territory here is what is important. So they appear to be willing to pay that price, to sacrifice those people at the altar of square miles or square kilometers. So anyway, interesting. I will put this analysis, because it's open source. You should be able to see this on OneDrive, and I'll put this in the description to this video. Please check it out. And I'm so sorry, Dell, for having neglected to do this for a week. My brain is just so full of stuff and things to do. It's just, sorry, it went by the wayside. Massive apologies. Okay. 80 Russians have surrendered in the past 3 weeks in the southern Ukrainian area alone. Of course, when you have numbers like this, it's difficult to know whether that's good, bad, or whatever without a frame of reference. 80 Russians, that number could have been 180, and I still would have been like, oh, good, I guess. I presume this is being announced because that is quite bad for the Russians. Active infantry attacks by the occupiers continue. 37 combat clashes took place. During the day, the enemy lost 429 personnel, 21 units of military equipment. A few more occupiers surrendered. It should be noted that in 3 weeks, about 80 enemy servicemen made such a choice in the Tavri direction, The activity of enemy aviation is low. 7 airstrikes were recorded during the day, and the invaders significantly increased the number of artillery fire up to 955. So that is a bit of a snapshot of that sort of general direction down to the south. Just to note this helicopter loss, and it's nothing to do with the military activities in Ukraine, but a Me-2 helicopter's crashed flying over an oil pipeline in Russia. Preliminary causes engine failure. Now, when I think of how many helicopters crash in the UK on an annual basis, it's not many. If basically average of close to zero do occasionally happen. We have seen quite a number of helicopters crash within Russia this year. Does this represent an issue in terms of sanctioned spare parts and whatnot? I don't know, but therefore it could be connected to the war in that way. Okay, in the Krinky direction, we are starting to see losses of Desert Cross 1003. They are in service with the Russian Air Force. These are these light vehicles that they've got from Russia. Over 1,000 of these are due to be delivered in total. I think maybe over 2,000 in over 2 delivery lots. But anyway, we're starting to see them being destroyed. It's one of these things where Russia appeared to be able to get hold of these from China without too much kickback from the West, even though these are very clearly used by the military. So, yeah, bit of a grey area there. But they're destroyed by Ukrainian drones. Now, going to a massive fire that took place yesterday. Boy, there are a lot of people smoking in Russia today, says Tim White. A blaze at a luxury car plant in Moscow was spotted just over an hour ago. Within 13 minutes, it was well alight. Now the fire has reportedly spread to neighbouring buildings. This is a big fire. Another big fire in Russia, in Moscow, indeed. And what makes me... Well, okay, let's talk about this for a second. Warehouses at Moscow plant specialised vehicles are still on fire at the Okritoye highway tonight. The area of the fires in East Moscow reached 2,000 square metres. The Ministry of Emergency Situations reports the fire has already been assigned to the third level of complexity, with more than 150 specialists and 50 pieces of equipment to continue to work on the site. Earlier, operational services reported the pallets, tyres and cardboard were stored in the burning room. Cause is of course still unknown. This is my claim now, as it is reported in the plant of a specialised vehicle, not named specifically. I think it's possible one of the following plants, after research of the street name, they all have something with military in common. And he links that. So the point being, it's a bit garbled, but point being there could be military connections to that factory. But even if it doesn't have military connection, when you see that there's another fire, this is in Vladivostok, and that's from this morning. So this started this morning. That's on the eastern seaboard of Russia. A big fire that looks like that could cause some serious problems for those buildings. When you see these fires over the course of the war, you count up these fires and how much these fires have cost Russia to basically to sort out. Initially, the emergency services working on this, you can see the amount of emergency services working here, the number of pieces of equipment, number of people, how much money that takes to fix, put out. But then it's the impact on the economy, the impact on insurance, the impact on insurance premiums, the impact right across Russia. If you were to add up all of these incidences and the cost of these incidences, I am fairly sure it would have a really meaningful effect on Russia, on money, on budgets within Russia. These are not just the odd fire here and there. These are consistently large fires burning across Russia and causing issues. They will have knock-on effects in terms of logistics, the ability to get hold and buy whatever it is these facilities are making or doing, whether it be products or services. That will then put up the cost of those products in the kind of supply and demand. Right, you can't buy any of those things from any of those widgets from that massive warehouse. It's burnt down. So now everyone has to demand from existing supplies, and those supplies are dwindling, so therefore the cost will go up. In other words, there are knock-on effects that will be felt across the Russian economy. These aren't just random incidences. This is a concerted, I think, project from Ukraine, as well as insurance jobs, as well as people smoking and genuine accidents. You put all of these things together, though, and it will have a marked effect on Russia, I'm fairly sure. Okay, talking about distance strikes, 18 to 24 drones were shot down overnight by Ukraine's air defense. Fairly good interception rate, but that's still 6 drones getting through. And when we hear that Shahid's near Khmelnytsky, moving towards Starokonstantinov, which is an airbase in Khmelnytsky, you're thinking, well, if 6 got through, what damage did they cause? Enemy drones from Kirovohrad, Kirovohrad and Poltava regions have changed their direction, are heading towards Dnipro, and indeed, we hear that residents reported explosions in Khmelnytsky and Dnipropetrovsk. We don't know what the damage is that those 6 Shahids that got through, what they caused, but it could be difficult for the Ukrainians, even though they shot down the majority of these Shahids. Again, lots of reports on air defense working in Khmelnytsky and explosions heard. On the other hand, explosions near the oil depot in Luhansk. So here we have a drone causing a big issue to this oil depot here. Ukrainian forces attacked the oil depot in Luhansk using a drone, military commanders told Russian state agency RIA Novosti. So that's just one drone, gets through, causes that damage to that oil depot. So when we then rewind and say, okay, well, 6 drones got through in Ukraine, is there six incidences like this? So we must remember that when the Ukrainian air defense fails to take down, which they will, because it's impossible such a large country to hit 100% on a routine basis of these drones. When 6 drones get through, there will be significant damage still being done. We just don't always hear about it because the Ukrainians do a much better job of closing down that information. Krasnodar was hit with an explosion that's within the Russian territory itself, and then explosions near Melitopol airfield as well. Right, okay. So, moving on to other bits and pieces. Here we have a video which I'm not going to show you, but I am going to just refresh that. Sorry, my browser sometimes has issues. Right, here we have a video of 2 Ukrainian prisoners of war and then 1 prisoner getting the absolute crap kicked out of him. And again, this is just to say this is another war crime. Here you go. The Russians are doing it routinely. Someone called me out again. I'm not quite sure where this person stands, as whether it's pro-Russian trolls, challenged me on a number of things, but then makes claims to be over here. But a chap called Bertold said, yeah, but what about all the Ukrainian war crimes? It's like, we're talking Ukrainian war crimes that we know about can probably be counted on 1 or 2 hands. We have over 110,000 reported war crimes in Ukraine as a result of Russia's activity, Russian war crimes. Over 110,000 reported. And absolutely closed book evidence, verified evidence of a vast array of these. I mean, there's an awful lot of video evidence of these things. I've shown you 2 in 2 days, right? So it is not this kind of like whataboutery or both sidesism is completely invalid as a claim. Like, yeah, but what about Ukrainian ones? Yeah, that's a ratio of like 1 to 50,000, right? Yes, there will be war crimes because humans are imperfect, right? But they aren't systemic war crimes. They'll just be angry Ukrainians doing things or doing things in the heat of the moment or whatever. Generally speaking, it is just not in the same ballpark. Well, it is not in the same ballpark. And it's invalid to try and invoke Ukrainian war crimes as a response to evidence of Russian war crimes. Just the Russians are utilizing many of these war crime techniques, methods, whatever, systematically, institutionally. I mean, I'm going to be interviewing John Sweeney at midday today in a couple of hours, less than a couple of hours, and his documentary Under Deadly Skies specifically speaks to people who have been tortured and prima facie evidence of war crimes, first-hand evidence of war crimes. So they go around some of the torture or one of the torture facilities in Kherson, and it's just a different level. So you don't give me the what about Ukrainian war crimes. It won't wash with me. Over the month of November, Russia expanded the territory it controls in Ukraine by approximately 4 square kilometers. So November is about perspective. I talked about this last night. I'm fairly down at the moment on things, and I'm going to talk about that in the geopolitical video later because I am genuinely worried. I think the international political landscape is bad for Ukraine. I think the US is depressing me. Like, don't let me get in a room with Mike Johnson. Honestly, don't. It wouldn't end well for him. And I can barely move my legs, but I tell you what, I would for that. I'm getting annoyed. I'm getting annoyed at the rise of the far right in Europe and how it's got the fingerprints of Putin all over it. I'm getting annoyed that the UK appears to have a financial black hole through mismanagement and arguably through jumping out the EU and having the financial ramifications of Brexit that I think had the fingerprints of Putin on it as well. And you start adding all these things together, and you look at Sahel in Africa with Russia gaining prominence there with all the coups, and you look at the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and you're thinking authoritarian regimes appear to be on the rise, and authoritarian politics in Europe is on the rise. This is not cool. However, at the same time, Russia did only take 4 square kilometers in November, which is the smallest net change in control over a single month since February 2022. So that is something, I guess. And in fact, when you look at graphs like this, and you look, okay, so the invasion led to a couple of months where the Russians made loads of gains, and then we had, the counteroffensives. So that would have been the Kharkiv counteroffensive, and that would have been the Kherson counteroffensive, and then it's just been stable. This is positional fighting. Things really haven't changed. So that, in a sense, is depressing because there's just been a counteroffensive and we're hoping for that. But actually, Russia, the second greatest army in the world, have been unable to push beyond where they've been since they lost Kherson and Kharkiv. Now, if Ukraine can keep improving their situation on a monthly basis, then we could see this very positively, or you could read that as a stalemate. I then connect that to the political landscape around the world and think, okay, are Ukraine going to be able to get all the stuff they need? And I look at the fact that Ukraine aid is being held hostage by border aid by Republicans, and Lindsey Graham's just come out, and this is why I'm going to have a rant later on, because Lindsey Graham's now changed his tune, and I think there's compromise on him that he's changed his tune, that we're not going to do anything on Ukraine. He was the staunchest supporter of Ukraine aid, Lindsey Graham, the staunchest supporter in the Republicans, and he's now come out and said, we're not going to give aid until there's southern border aid. So why aren't you doing that with Israel aid? Why aren't you doing that with any other area of American politics? Why only Ukraine aid? People are dying as a result of that leveraging, right? But you're not doing it anywhere else. You're not doing it with any other initiative that's going on, any other funding that's going on in the US government. You're only doing it on Ukraine aid. And so anyone that on my threads, and they've been doing this, yeah, but the border is a problem. I don't care that the border is a problem. The border is a problem. Yes, okay, border is an issue. Those two things are not intrinsically linked, right? The border is not linked to Ukraine aid. It's being made to be linked by intransigent Republican politicians who are playing political football with Ukraine, but not playing political football with any other policy. So that makes me angry, because I'm getting worried and angry about the situation in Ukraine and about the rest of the world dithering, and Putin sitting on his arse smiling as the rest of the world dithers. The most obvious, during the Cold War era and Reaganism, you had money being absolutely spanked all over the place on US projects against the Soviet Union. It was like the big ideological thing. We now have the closest to an actual war between kind of the West and Russia, qua Soviet Union. Like, look, bigger than Afghanistan. This is big. And people are like, oh, yeah, not sure. Nah. Yeah, we'll give a few tanks. But, yeah, border security, please. Come on. Right, General Petraeus has it right. In our military doctrine, to break through the kind of defences we see in the southern Ukraine, you need an air advantage and much more. We did not provide that to the Ukrainians, former CIA Chief General Petraeus said in an interview with the BBC. The military criticised the slowness of the West and said that it was delays in arms deliveries that caused the failure of the AFU counteroffensive. The military, I think the military man, basically, quote, there was a delay in making decisions on Abrams, a delay with Leopard. We delayed cluster shells that could have been very useful, ATACMS, and finally, Western-style airplanes. He also pointed to Western mistakes that he believes indirectly led to the war in Ukraine. Quote, Putin decided that he could escape responsibility for the invasion of Ukraine because we did not take sufficient measures after the occupation of Crimea. True that on all of that, it's all a problem, and dithering's not going to help. Right, and just for a bit more of, yeah, you're right, the Russians are the bad guys. US diplomats, sinister Russian NGOs have been involved in abducting Ukrainian children. So this is Beth Van Schaik, who is the US ambassador at large for global criminal justice, saying children from Ukraine are being taken through occupied territories to Russia and further to Belarus. Rather sinister non-governmental organizations are involved in this, such as ultra-right biker groups. So people are being involved in basically this mass deportation of children. The European Parliament estimates that up to 300,000 Ukrainian children have been illegally deported to Russia since 2014, starting with the occupation of Crimea and parts of the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. It's just, yeah. Russian Deputy Prime Minister from 1983 said reproductive health of men and women will be included in the mandatory health checkup for Russians that will start in 2024. Producers of cannon fodder need to be kept healthy. This is the idea that families need to have 8 children. It kind of was hinted at by Putin. The glory days of Russian families having 8 children. That's what we need. More children. Why? Because we need more people for the army. Why? Because we want to invade sovereign countries. Why? Because I'm a narcissistic, megalomaniacal dictator. Okay. And just again, if you think Russia is fighting for freedom and liberty, they're censored My Little Pony. It's got an 18 restriction on it. Why? What's so violent about it? Well, it's the appearance of a My Little Pony with a rainbow hairstyle. Of course, that represents the LGBT community, and of course, they are now an extremist organisation. So this is now an 18, and kids won't be able to watch My Little Pony. Yeah, well done, Russia. Yeah, good effort. So I'm a little bit annoyed today. I need to vent my spleen. I'll probably do that a lot in the next video. Thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon.